Thanks, Chris. So welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to the presentation this afternoon. I think this morning, so far today, with the speakers we've had in the panel, has been very thought-provoking, which has been good. And some of what I'm going to talk about now is kind of following on from that theme in terms of leading a bit of food for thought, a couple of questions in there, and just looking a bit about what we're doing at Mott MacDonald. Okay, so I'm going to start, and I'm going to talk a little bit about big data and what that is, and around how we're going to interact with that, and how that's going to impact the industry. Then we're going to look at the anatomy of smart infrastructure. It's a concept that we at Mott MacDonald have come up with, kind of in the kind of looking at the approach to more of a data-driven environment that we're now finding ourselves in. And then I'll conclude really with bringing that back to sort of today's subject and looking at how smart infrastructure and BIM is actually interrelated as one thing. Okay, so as we all know and we've heard today, we've become very fast we've become a data-driven culture. We're generating vast amounts of information on a daily basis. That's structured and unstructured information. This data we can capture, it's recorded permanently. It can be analysed by computers to identify patterns, trends and associations. And it's data that we're using in our daily lives just to make our informed decisions. And as it was brought up earlier on, come to work in the morning, you look on Google Maps and you're deciding which route you're going to take. You're basing that on the information that's out there on the internet. This is kind of the big data coming into effect. Within our industry, the explosion of BIM has been a kind of a catalyst for change, and the way that we think and value data and information. Richard touched on it earlier on and sort of saying, the actual information, the data we're producing about our assets throughout their life cycle is becoming as much value as the actual physical asset itself. So we're seeing more and more data about the assets being produced, and especially early on in the design process, and I think that was some of the key messages we've had today, is that we're almost front-loading that because we know what requirements we want at the end, and we're needing to put that into the design process so we can efficiently analyse, evaluate and optimise the development within a virtual environment, and that's kind of the change. Rather than doing our testing on site and building the actual asset themselves, we're doing that in a virtual environment, something that actually mimics what's actually happening out on site in reality once we get to the end product being built. But when we look at this and we look at big data and we look at what's out there, are we actually making use of all the data that's actually available to us? Are we meeting all the stakeholders' requirements? Are we thinking and meeting the end user requirements? And I suppose the real big question here is, do we even know what they are? Have we asked the question about what their requirements are? And again, I think that's a recurring theme. So alongside the increase in data, the technology we use is growing. It's moving at a fast pace. Keeping up to it can be quite difficult. But you could look at it in a way that we're on the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution with the introduction of cyber-physical systems. Let me share with you a interesting but rather worrying statistic or fact. 20 years ago, or in the last 20 years, we've gone from limited mobile phone technology to within 4 years, more people having access to a smartphone than to a toilet. It does appear that as a civilization, we've become more interested in our digital needs than our basic sanitation needs. So as an industry, we need to start to grow and develop alongside our data-driven culture. And we're starting to see that, but we are taking it up very slowly, or it appears to be slowly in some areas. And this isn't just a case of looking at the technology and saying, let's buy some more software, let's throw some technology at it, let's get the IT guys some more money. We've still got a lot of obstacles to overcome, and I think we've heard that this morning already. We need to think about open data standards, think sort of HTML. It was touched on earlier on. The reasons our phone can talk, your Facebook, your Twitter accounts, your Instagram accounts, all that, they talk to each other, they interact with your your Outlook, it's because it's all based on a common data standard. We need to look at, and again this has come up, contractual frameworks that enable consistency, avoid confusion, encourage open collaborative working. At the moment we're still quite adversarial, and we need to have that interaction, that communication, and we need trust between all the parties. We also need to, and sort of moving on from that, we need to establish an environment which is cooperative and seeks to learn and share. All too often, sometimes we want to kind of hide behind our own closed doors and not want to give away our family silver. We also need to train the industry, and again that's brought up earlier on, just in the closing there, was that we need to train people. And we're not just talking about training them in the software. Simply training everyone in Revit or Tekla or AcoSim or something like that isn't really going to be good enough in these days moving forward. We need to look at the data standards, the processes and the data requirements. So with with technology ever evolving, unsurprisingly we're seeing diversity in the data origins and data formats. From social media through to just the way that we're storing information, whether that's in the cloud or SQL databases. And if you consider that as of 2015, Microsoft has over 51,000 different file formats on record, or file types on record. And we were talking earlier on about the interoperability issues that we actually have and how we connect all our data together. When we've got that kind of size of file types out there, you know, we are in a bit of a dilemma. And again, it's touched on in Laura's what she was saying about in terms of moving forward with the technology and the advances of BIM. You know, we are permanently connected one way or another, whether that's on our laptops, whether that's on our desktops, whether it's on our mobile devices. And again, it's not just us that are connected. The objects out there in the physical world are also connected. And through the Internet of Things, we're actually seeing the direct integration of the physical world into the virtual world. In 2015, there was some 10 billion Internet of Thing endpoints. By 2019, it's expected to reach 30 billion. By 2050, it's expected to reach 50 billion. Although this is starting to gain traction within our industry, the Internet of Things does need to be, we do need to approach Internet of Things with slight caution. We need to be cautious that perhaps not all the data is there that we actually need. We've talked about trust of that data as well. What sort of validation and verification has that gone through that we're using? We also need to be cognizant that we're not actually collecting too much data too early on, because that's quite wasteful activities. And also make sure we've actually got enough information, otherwise that's just going to leave us asking a lot of questions and making too many assumptions. Just as an example of where sort of data collection can go awry, in the US a model was built aimed at correlating US unemployment figures with the frequency of people using words such as unemployment, jobs and classifieds. In the latter part of 2011, when there was a sudden spike, the researchers were convinced that they had predicted an impending rise in unemployment, when in actual fact it turned out the information had been severely misinterpreted, because at that time the Apple CEO, Steve Jobs, had just passed away, and their model was simply picking up on posts with his name in. So we do need to touch this subject with an air of caution. Which kind of leaves me with a couple of kind of open-ended questions and food for thoughts on that one is, you know, these are challenges for our industry. We need to start using the data. We're collecting data on a daily basis. But how do we connect that data in all those different formats? How do we ensure we have confidence in that data, that we can actually use it and for the right reasons? And how do we turn that data into meaningful information quickly without needing to recreate it? So as I said earlier, it's hard to disagree that perhaps the construction industry is slightly behind other industries when it comes to the adoption of technology and taking advantage of the vast amounts of data that we're actually collecting that's out there and ready for our use. We're seeing new products on the market born out of the Internet of Things. Laura touched on it earlier on about the wearables. You know, how many people here have a Fitbit or something similar, the smart watches that are available to us. These track our everyday activities, how many steps we're taking, how far we've covered, what our heart rate might be 24/7, how much sleep we're getting or not getting in a lot of people's cases. But we can then put this information into the cloud, we can share it with other people, we can analyse that ourselves. We can look at that and sort of say, what are our goals? What do we want to achieve? Are we achieving our outcomes at the end of the day? Are we getting enough exercise? If we start putting into that amount of calories we're eating or something like that, are we actually doing enough exercise to start to reduce that? We've all got our own personal goals. And for our homes as well, we have items such as the Nest now. Not only does this manage the temperature in our rooms remotely, or allow us to manage the temperature in the room remotely, it learns patterns about our comfort levels. So it starts to adjust. It almost starts to self-learn, sort of talking about artificial intelligence earlier on, so that it can actually start to use the energy efficiency within our households. And if if only we realise this data was available, how useful would that be to us if we're building new homes and houses? We're talking about sustainability. What we need is that performance data that's happening, understanding how people are living their lives. And that could be put back into the way that we design, construct and build, and then manage and operate our assets. So the Internet of Things is starting to take off, and we're starting to see embedded sensory equipment being used to capture performance data about the assets that we've been designing, building and operating. We can use this information that's being fed back, and we can start to analyse that building or that asset. We can understand, is it performing the way we expect it to perform during the design process? We can see what its actual performance is and start to predict maintenance. So rather than going out and just doing regular maintenance works, we can become predictive maintenance work. That's putting money in the right position, using the money wisely, putting it where it needs to go. And I think through the Internet of Things, we will start to see a shift from the traditional linear process of design, procure, deliver and operate. We'll actually see a process where we've got a feedback loop, allowing us to optimise performance and evaluate design changes in use. The sort of shift in technology and the shift that we're seeing with the digital disruption and everything else is a scale and scope and complexity unlike anything we've probably seen before, and it's happening quick, it's happening fast, and it's happening now. We're not yet, I don't think we fully understand how it will unfold, but one thing is clear, the response needs to be integrated, comprehensive, involving all stakeholders on a global polity, from public sector and private sectors to academia and the civil society. I think that's sort of the key message that Richard came out with earlier. BIM is here, it's here to stay, and BIM is everything, or covers everything, should I say. So bringing some of this slightly closer back to home, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed has set out a clear vision where he wants a smart, happy and transparent city. I see that BIM and moving forward with smart infrastructure, smart cities is a clear enabler towards achieving these visions. And we can help as part of the industry through better collection, production, sharing and use of data. So just want to come on to the anatomy of smart infrastructure. As I said earlier, this is a concept created by Mott MacDonald in the preparation and the response to the change in the digital disruption that's happening within the industry. This is set over three layers, so I'm going to go through each one by one. So at the first level here we see data management. So smart infrastructure begins with data, which needs to be harvested, cleansed and structured. We've talked about structured and unstructured data earlier on. In this layer we see that data is captured at the bottom there by any of those sources that we're starting to do. As we know, we've got the GIS and BIM systems. We're starting to collect more and more survey information point clouds. That then moves on to what we class as sensory making. So this is value added by making sense of the basic data using middleware, data mining, data analysis and data analytics. So intelligence can be, at this level, intelligence can be gained and used by operators and users to understand what's going on actually with those assets at that particular time, or even with this during the design process. Alternatively, the information can be fed into the decision making, which is kind of at the top of the triangle there. So this is, if we can make better decisions faster, we can enable asset performance to be optimised and efficiency maximised. So making sure we're asking the right questions, what decisions do we need to make? And that can filter back down through, and this is what we heard earlier on about thinking with the end in mind. If we know what decisions and answers we need, or what our informed decision need to be, we can start to work out what information we need to have, in what format, when, where, who supplies that information. Decision making is assisted by specific decision making tools, optimized algorithms, we heard that earlier on as well, and machine learning. So the more data we're feeding into that, and with the ever evolving AI, the machines can start to learn and sort of take that information and use it wisely. So how does that fit in with the topic we're talking about today in BIM and the future and where that's moving forward? Well, in a similar kind of way that we're looking at this. So we have obviously what we know as BIM. If we take that from the top though and come down this time, again this follows this theme of understanding what we want to be able to achieve. And that's not just the clients we're thinking about. You know, if you're the contractor and you're employing the designer, or your designer or the architect employing each other, you have a set of requirements, you have a set of decisions you need to make at each stage of that project. And for that you need some kind of information. So what we have at the top here, effectively, if you follow the UK set of standards and PAS 1192 Part 3, especially here, we look at what the organisation requirements, what information is required to inform decision making aligned to that organisation's goals and objectives. So if you're an asset owner, what are your goals and objectives? What information do you need to know about your assets in order to actually achieve those goals and objectives? Coming down the line slightly, we're then looking at the actual assets themselves. What information do you need to know to manage and maintain those assets? This is more akin to the information that we would see typically at handover. But again, if we knew that up front, we knew what information to build within there. But again, we might not often know what that is at this time. You know, we're still early in that journey, and not all asset owners perhaps might have reached the end of that journey to understand that. So we're not always going to get that up front. So at Mott MacDonald, we spend a lot of time helping and advising clients with their BIM strategy so they can start to embed that in as they move forward.
It's a great presentation. We were talking about data, big data and more data and all. So eventually, from personal to organization, all data is there up in the air or cloud. How about the digital security, even privacy of the people, because the data is there for eventually, for everything is out there in the...
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the other challenges we need to overcome, is the cyber security. That's a big issue. There's a lot of data out there that's on the internet at the moment. There's lots of ISO standards around how we manage and look after that data. And we need to think about that and harness that a bit more. And I think with the Internet of Things and the objects actually transmitting data to and from, that can be hacked in some way. And I think it was touched on earlier on that, you know, we need to look at that cyber security. There are, in the UK, you've got PAS Part 5, which actually looks at data security and what we need to do. And I think, again, that's one of the challenges moving forward to become more data-driven, is actually having the confidence in the security of our information that's out there in the cloud.
There's a question right here in the middle. If we could just get a microphone.
Good afternoon. Throughout the life cycle of any construction project, there's obviously going to be a lot of organisations that are going to have an impact that is affecting the assets and the ongoing updating of information that would be feeding into the BIM platform. At what stages do each different organisations, or who has overall responsibility to ensure that the BIM information is kept up to date?
That's a good question. I don't know what the right answer is for that. I mean, I think that comes down to opinion. It comes down to contract on where you are in the project, and who's contractually liable for the information and delivery of that information at that particular point in time. It is probably a hot topic in terms of who owns what within the model. At the moment, when we're talking about separated models, we can manage that quite easily and know who owns the content of that. We can do that, enable that through the common data environment by having governance and security around that. But when we start to talk more of it actually being data and being a interrelated or an interconnected model, we need to start looking at individual object level then and who owns that. I think that's an area, again, that needs a lot of thinking about, a lot of work to do within there, and it's going to come down to contractual requirements and frameworks. If we're using more of a collaborative framework and we're working together and there's a lot more trust and we're working more closely with project partners on a regular basis, I think that we will start to see that slowly shift away and start to making sure that we're only putting into those models or into that the information that we do want to share. Model view definitions, starting taking out subsets of IFC, that's another way of actually only taking out the information so we can still generate it, take that information out that we are happy to share, so we're not sort of too concerned with the IPR then, which is obviously a big issue.
It's a good question. It's certainly a topic that was probably not quite specifically picked up as you have there, but going through this morning, we were talking about handover documentation, we were talking about use of common models as well, and I know from my own experience, and I would say this unfortunately, in fact, are there any lawyers in the room? No, they aren't. So that means I'm pretty safe. Is that when you actually bring the model together as a common model, there is then a legal argument about not the ownership actually, but the responsibility of all of those intricate parts, as Paul has just said, within it. And that this is a challenge that the industry has got to get through. But it surely cannot be an insurmountable challenge. It's another thing we've got to do, I think. Very good point. For those of you who couldn't quite hear the lady, so I don't know your name, said it's not only trust of the different parts of the team, it's also trusting the data that's actually going into the model itself. I think that's a great statement to make. Any other questions at all from the floor? One up. Sorry, there's one at the back there. Alan.
Alan Muse, RICS. You talked about data as the fourth factor of production, which I tend to agree with in terms of what we might see over the forthcoming years. But I was interested in your thoughts about how professions in their training should begin to speak to the technologists more and perhaps bring data science more into professional training. What are your thoughts on that?
Good question. I think that we will start seeing a trend in changing the way that we're doing things. Our engineers at university today, tomorrow, 10, 20 years time, they're going to be learning different skills and different processes because we are becoming data driven, and I think you'll start to see that being coming through the universities and even down to the school levels. I mean, the younger generation today, they can pick up an iPad, they can pick up a smartphone, and they seem to know what to do with it, and some of us still struggle with these things. And I think that we are going to need to become more looking at the data process, but still alongside the traditional engineering processes. We'll be having rule-based design software as opposed to what we potentially do in a traditional design process today. So the processes will change, and therefore some of the education and skills that we need to teach the next generation of engineers, next generation of architects and contractors will need to evolve with that. And I think that is starting to come through slowly.
Alan, that has always been a challenge for our industry, has it not? It's not just about BIM. There's always been this requirement to connect the industry with our learning establishments and the professions with our learning establishments to make sure the output, if you like, of the people that are coming out and going to be delivering in this industry we're in at the moment are actually bringing through the learning that we're having to deal with today. It's as I say, it's a perennial thing. Sometimes we're better at it. Sometimes we need to pay a little bit more attention to that. Any more questions from the floor at all? I'll just finish on, if there's nothing further, I'll just finish on one. There was a big, I don't know if anybody else noticed, there was one big number on one of those slides you had at the end there, Paul, but I do know that there's a certain amount of data to back that up, particularly in the UK, they're looking to get to level 3 maturity. And they were talking about opportunities exactly like that in the whole life cost of the asset, around 30%. Do you see that as immediately achievable here, or is this a journey that we need to get to? And in which case, I guess there must be some sort of number at the front end in the capex that we could actually access now.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the UK and when they actually did start that journey, it was 2007 was when the British Standard 1192 got re-released again. You had the construction strategy that come out in 2011, and that's when they sort of posted the target savings of 20%. And that's 20% of waste that they were looking at. So it's not sort of saying that there's going to be a £100 million asset, we're going to get it for 80 million. At that time, they're looking at the wasteful activities that actually happen. The problem we have with information, lack of information, ambiguity of information, uncoordinated information. So it's rather than spending the 120 million, we're spending that. I think recently they published that they had achieved 1.2 billion savings, which equated to about 20% of public sector spending. But that was over a 4-year period they actually achieved that. And on the drive to that, they actually set up a lot of government working groups looking at different areas within there. The mandate come down from the government, the way the government works in the UK. If the top guy says it all, everyone has to do that. And sometimes that doesn't filter through into other countries as well. You can have the mandate there, which they put through, but they actually put the standards, the processes behind all of that, looked at all the frameworks and started to help bring the supply chain and the client organisations on. It will take time to get momentum. We've got the Dubai Municipality BIM mandate, but that's not, say, as advanced in terms of standards and following the same set of rules that we do, or that we have seen in the UK. So I think there's still time to develop that. And I think it's good with what's happening with some of the government organisations. The RTA are definitely moving ahead with that, and I think that's starting to bring the supply chain along a lot more. So I think we've still got some time to go. But I think that a 20% savings or savings in waste at least, that's sort of achievable. But we're not going to see that unless we have these standardised processes in place. We're all sort of following a consistent approach. We have those contractual frameworks in place as well, so we have more of an open and a collaborative way of working with each other. Yeah,
great opportunity though. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're just about to transition to our lunch break now. After lunch, we have a presentation of Charles Dunk of ACOM talking about immersive technology, so be sure not to miss that. We need to be back in here at 13:50, so that is 10 to 2. Please do your best to get here on time so that we can recover some of the lost time that we've had this morning. But it's been I think a great discussion and very productive. So thank you so far for your participation. Let's get out for lunch now. Thank you.